Hey guys, today I'm going to be starting a lot of seeds for our cut flower garden, so I just wanted to show you a little bit of what I have going on. We already have a lot of cool weather flowers out in the garden, but now that we're a little later in the season and the days are getting warmer, I'm starting a lot of warm weather flowers. So starting off with some sunflowers, I have a couple of just typical varieties that I want to have around the vegetable garden. This Evening Sun mix is one of our favorites that we've planted for a few years. It has a bunch of really beautiful color blends in there. And then the next few are hybrid sunflowers. These are all pollenless, so they're really good to have as cut flowers. Of course, I had to have an option of just like the classic yellow-orange sunflower, but I also have some fun ones. I'm starting a couple of white varieties, one with a lighter center and one with a darker center, and I'll talk about these a little more later on. Then I have a variety of Rudbeckia. This is also known as Black-Eyed Susan, which is like a classic yellow flower, but I have a really cool mix that's called Sahara that is more of like a pinky orange mix. Then I have a couple of varieties of Amaranth. This is grown as a grain and it's just like Amaranth you can buy at the store to eat. But I want to be growing this for cut flowers, or if I let them go to seed, I think the birds will really love them in the garden as well. So I have a couple of different color options, and then I also have this Love Lies Bleeding type that has these really long fuchsia strings of amaranth that I think will look really cool. Next I have a few variety of Cosmos. I have a Seashells blend which has these really cool fluted petals. Then I just have a couple of more normal varieties in different colors, a Burgundy Rubenzo one, and then Xanthos, which is more of a light yellow flower. I also have a couple of different kinds of grass, Frosted Explosion and Bunny Tails. These are going to be really good fillers for bouquets, and I think the Bunny Tails one will be really fun because it just looks really soft, and I think that will be a fun element to include in bouquets. And lastly, the largest section of seeds that I'll be starting today are Zinnias. Zinnias are super easy to grow, so if you're a first-time gardener and are trying to get more flowers in your garden, this is a great one to grow. They're also especially good for cut flower gardens because you can keep cutting them and they'll keep coming back. They're really easy to grow from seed and there are so many different varieties out there. So I have a bunch of different colors here. I have some mixes here that have a bunch of different colors in them, but also some that just have single color palettes. And I have a few varieties that I got in a seed swap, and I can go over those in a little more detail later on. So now that I have all my varieties picked out, I'm going to go ahead and write the tags for all of them. I like to do this ahead of time to stay organized, and also because later on your hands are going to be dirty and covered with soil, so I think it's just neater to do it all this way. For my first batch of seeds, I'm going to create my own seed starting mix. I'm starting off with 1 part of peat moss. This is a pretty common base for most potting and seed starting mixes. But if you get this in a compressed bale, you'll get at least twice the quantity and half the price of a normal bag of potting mix. I've just made sure to screen out any of these larger bark and twigs out of this mix because you don't want those in your seed starting mix. Then I'll add 1 part of compost. The compost I use is pretty fine, so I didn't screen this, but I'll just go through it really roughly and pick out any big pieces that I see. If your compost is a little rougher, you'll probably want to screen that as well. The compost is there to add a little bit of nutrition to the soil because peat moss doesn't have any nutrients in it. And lastly, we're going to add 1 part perlite. This is a really light material that helps to keep the soil aerated and lets water drain freely through the trays. So in total, it's just 1 part peat moss, 1 part compost, and 1 part perlite. Super easy, and you end up with a really nice fluffy mixture. I'm just going to add enough water to moisten this entire mix and just mix everything up thoroughly. And here you can see that I can squeeze it together and it holds together, but doesn't have any excess water squeezing out of it, so this is the perfect consistency. I'm going to add it to my cell tray now. I'm using a 72 plug tray. I really like this size, especially for seeds that grow a little bit faster or have bigger seeds. I think if you use anything smaller, they'll outgrow their trays really quickly, but I don't want the cells to be too big either because I'm trying to maximize my space here. So I think this will be perfect for the seeds that I'm starting today. I'm just filling in my tray with the pre-moistened seed starting mix that I mixed up. I'm making sure to firmly press my soil down all the way into the bottom of the cells. Don't go too crazy and like pack it in, but you just want to make sure that there's soil in the whole thing and that you don't have any air gaps. If you do have those, then your roots will have a harder time developing in that soil, and it'll also dry out a lot quicker with those air gaps. So I just make sure that everything is gently but firmly packed in there, and then I'll top off as needed. I'm going to start adding my seeds in here, and I'm aiming to have 2 to 3 seeds for most of these. And I'm going to do just 1 or 2 rows for each of these varieties just because I have multiple varieties of each different kind of flower. So I don't think I need like a full tray of one color of cosmos. If I have 6 cells of 3 different varieties, then that's plenty for me. For the seeds that are a little bit larger, like the cosmos seeds, I'll make sure to bury them just under the soil surface. But then there are some seeds like these grass seeds that are a little bit smaller, and also the amaranth, and I'm just going to surface sow those and press them into the top of the soil. I'll also sow these smaller seeds a little heavier than I would with the larger ones. I'll do like 4 to 5 per cell. Part of this is because they're so small that it's hard to control it, but part of it is also because it's harder to keep these smaller seeds moist to germinate. So I would rather oversow, and if some of them dry out, then at least there will be some backups in there. I'm going to be covering this tray with Vermiculite. This is a lightweight material that helps to regulate moisture. I like to do this especially if I've surface sown seeds, just because they have nothing on top of them. This is just a really nice material to use if you have it on hand to boost that germination rate. It's also nice to have if you have seeds that require light to germinate, because this material does allow light to pass through it. So you just want to check the back of your packet of seeds to see if light or darkness is something that you need for the seeds that you're sowing. If you don't have this, you don't have to use it. You can just use a humidity dome and just make sure you're keeping good track of your seeds and keeping them moist until they germinate. The next tray of seeds I'm going to start is all of the bigger seeds, and I find that they don't need a really fine seed starting mix, so I'm just going to use regular potting soil for this. This is just bagged potting soil that you can get at the store already all mixed up. And again, I'm going to pre-moisten it, and I'm going to fill this tray as well. This is also a 72 cell tray. And same deal with this one, I am doing 1 to 2 rows of each variety. And this tray is going to be filled with my sunflowers and zinnias. A lot of people would direct sow these seeds, and that works really well, but for the sunflowers in particular, I wanted to make sure and start these ahead of time because we have a lot of birds and deer and rabbit in our area, and I don't want them to eat those seedlings before they are off to a good start. And I've heard that a lot of flower farmers actually start their sunflowers ahead of time as well, and they transplant just fine. And there are still some sunflowers that I'm going to direct sow, like the ones for our vegetable garden that are just the normal ones that have pollen. But especially for these pollenless varieties, these are hybrids that cost a little bit more to get those seeds. They're actually pretty expensive and you don't get that many in a packet, so I really want to make sure that I can make the most out of those seeds as possible. So for these first few varieties, I'm going to just be doing 1 seed per cell. I don't want to waste that seed, and if one doesn't come up, that's okay. Another thing to note for these pro cut varieties that I'm doing here, the white knight and orange, they only produce 1 sunflower per stem. So each seed is going to give you 1 sunflower. And in order to get more throughout the season, you're going to have to keep replanting these in successions. So it might not seem like a lot that I'm doing only 6 of each variety, but this is just for this week. And then in 2 weeks, I'm going to start seeds again and do this cycle all over again so that I'll always have a continuous supply. And I also have other varieties of sunflowers that I'm saving for later successions as well. For the jade variety that I'm planting, this is actually a branching one that I believe is also pollenless. And for this one, I won't have to do as many successions because branching sunflowers do produce more than 1 sunflower per plant. And the rest of the tray, I'm just going to fill in with my zinnia seeds. For these, I'm just going to throw in the usual 2 to 3 seeds per cell. So I have Cinderella Peach, which has a really cool, I think they call it like a cupcake form for the flower, which is really different. Then I have Envy Zinnias, which are just a green zinnia that are really good almost as a filler of a bouquet because the green kind of just looks like foliage. Then we have Bennery's Giant, which is a pretty popular mix. I think these are supposed to be more disease resistant than other zinnias. We also have Queen Lime Orange and Queen Lime Red, which are a really cool vintagey color palette. We have Polar Bear, which is just a white one, which again will match with a lot of different things. And then I have Meteor, which is a red zinnia. After I have all of these seeds placed into their cells, I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit more of that potting soil on top so that everything is buried by 1/8 to 1/4 inch of soil. And I'm not going to be covering this tray with vermiculite because all of these seeds will be buried underneath the soil surface since they're a little bit bigger. I was able to plant most of the varieties that I showed you in the beginning into these 2 plug trays. I'm just going to mist over them with some water just to settle the soil in a little bit and to keep that top layer moist. These days our greenhouse is pretty warm and it hasn't been freezing at night, so I'm going to be keeping these seeds in the greenhouse on a bottom layer of our shelf. They don't need light until they germinate, so this spot will be fine, and then once they come up, I'll move them into an area with more sunlight. And if it does freeze at night, I'll have to bring them indoors, but you can just let these germinate in any warm space that you have, and then we'll just keep an eye on them until they start growing.